research and things like that. So that really, to me, is the main difference in qualitative and quantitative. Quantitative, they both have lots of similarities because in research, as I'm sure Dr. Wells gone over a number of times, you want very specific information. You never want to have a super broad question because then you have too many things to ask about. So even in quantitative, just like that, qualitative, you want something pretty specific. But instead of, as in quantitative, in qualitative, you actually don't want a certain objective already set up for yourself. You want to kind of find out about something rather than saying, this is what's going to happen. Well, in qualitative, we don't want you to say that. We know that you're going to have a bias because you've experienced lots of things. So from your experience, you're going to have an idea of what you're going to find out about this, whatever topic you're going to look at. However, we don't want you to say, well, this is what's going to happen. Because at that point, you've already established a bias and your qualitative research is no longer going to be any good. Because everything you see is going to focus on what you already have in your head. You already know that most of you, let's go with this. We know that when you do a squat, and I know you know this, so, and you're teaching somebody how to squat, and you see their knee go over their toe, why don't you want them to do that?
Because it's bad form.
It's bad form, but what could it hurt? It could hurt their knees, right? So you already know this. So going into qualitative, that's not going to be something that you can actually find out about, okay? Because you already have in your head, well, you shouldn't do that. Well, what if somebody does that their whole life and they don't have anything wrong with them? Now, I just proved you wrong. Does that mean that your first idea was wrong? Not necessarily, but for that person it was wrong. And that's why we have qualitative, because qualitative looks at individual rather than a whole mess of people all together. It's saying that the percentage of the whole group is what we have to go by. What we want to do in qualitative is look specifically at you, or you, or you. Or you can look at a group of people, but they have to be very, very similar, okay? And you're only looking at one quality of that group. So that's why it's a little bit different in that way. So, thank you. Assistant Dr. Well. So differences, those are the main differences that I told you, but there are some other ones. So in qualitative, we like the natural setting. We don't want a lab. We don't want to put them in a lab. We want them to be in their natural environment. If I'm going to study monkeys, I want them in a tree. I don't want them in a lab. If I'm going to study a person that's swimming, I want them in a pool. I don't want them in a lab, okay? Because that's what we want to do. We want to have a natural, as much a natural setting as possible. Now that's good and that's bad. There's good and bad with both of these, so it doesn't matter. But natural can be good because it makes the person more relaxed. They're going to behave in that regular way. However, because you're in the natural environment, you're going to have things that come into play that wouldn't come into play in a lab. Like the wind, like the sun, like other people or animals or things like that. So there's good and bad about both of those. Qualitative is very descriptive. We like to use words. We don't like numbers. Numbers are bad.
Numbers are very good.
Quantitative people like numbers, and that's okay. But what we like to look at is more just the description. Tell me about it. Why is this happening? Those kinds of things, okay? We're concerned not necessarily with the product, although I really don't like that it says that we're not concerned with the product or result, because we are concerned with the result, but we want to know about the process more, okay? How did you get there? Okay. The result is fine, and you can do a lot with that. There's a lot of description on the result, but at the same time, really, the process is what we're looking at, okay? How did we get from here to there rather than we got there in 10 seconds, okay? The number doesn't matter. What happens is, did I walk, did I use my side muscle, my back muscle, what did I use, why did I use it? Those kinds of things are why it's important. And then you analyze that inductively, okay? Figuring out why those things are happening, answering your questions, okay? We want questions, we like description, we want to do that. And then the meaning is that's what our concern is the meaning of it. So I like the question why. What is a good question? Those are both questions that, how is another good question that we use in qualitative, because those are questions that tend to be open-ended questions. When you start with a what or a how, you're going to have more of an open-ended question. You're not going to have a yes-no answer. We don't like yes-no answers because they don't tell us anything about the process. All they tell us is the result. Do you like this? So do is not a good question for us. Those open-ended ones are the ones that you want to look at, okay? And so that's where we go with that. Now on Blackboard, you have on Blackboard, Dr. Ball has uploaded, and I'll try to get it. You have it down here, right?
Good.
All right.
It's, all right, so we're going to just switch screens for a minute, and the distance people won't be able to see this because I can't put it into whatever it is. But this is actually in next week's folder. In this week's folder, you've got some information from another textbook on qualitative research to support Dr. Berkey's lecture. And this comparison chart is in next week's folder because I use it in my quantitative lecture.
So this one, it tells you just almost exactly what I just said, okay? It gives you a list of comparison between the qualitative and quantitative. It lists all of the phrases, some key concepts and methodology, academic affiliation, goals, relationship, instruments, data analysis. So every piece of the qualitative and the quantitative are compared. So look through that again to make sure that you understand the differences in those. They're very different. They're not anything,
The approach is totally different.
Yeah.
You don't have a purpose statement in qualitative very often, right? They will have a research question that is like a hypothesis in a quantitative study.
but using these.
But their question is, why did something happen? How did you feel about something? Rather than a purpose where we are predicting, like, what is going to happen? If I do this, what's going to happen in this? Does that make a little bit of sense? All right.
So that's what, and so look through those if you're having an issue between them. Has everybody, they haven't done their purpose statement yet, or?
No, they're working on their purpose statements right now.
So you're starting to figure out what you're interested in, the subject. And since we're doing a general, because each of you has a different subject that you're interested in, which is great, it'll kind of depend what your question is, but then we can form it. You can form any topic into a quantitative or a qualitative. Almost, there are very few topics that are going to be solely one or the other. You can pretty much go either way, but it kind of depends on what you want to know. I mean, that goes to that. So, okay. So this you look at. So go ahead and pick that up, and then we'll go on to the next one. So in a literature review for a qualitative, what you want to do is you're going to have an introduction of the literature review. You're going to, this is normally in chapter 2, you're going to have some kind of introduction. What you're going to do is you're going to break down the topic. You're going to break it down into sections. I did my dissertation on counterfactual feedback, which is a feedback type for teaching, okay? So what I had to do in my chapter 2 is break that down. So what goes along with feedback? I had to write about instruction because teachers give feedback. So now I have to look at who is an effective instructor because feedback goes along with being an effective instructor. So I looked at that. Also, what does the feedback try to do? The feedback tries to make the student think. So I had to do another section on critical thinking because that has to do with how you're going to teach and how you're going to make the student learn. Also had to do on learning styles because every student has different learning styles. Believe it or not, there's really no evidence that you learn differently. But anyway, that's a whole other subject, so we won't go into that. But I had to do a whole topic on learning styles because that's part of feedback, is how you learn. Teaching styles, that's another part of teaching and teaching effectiveness. So that's another piece of my topic. So all of those sections were in my chapter 2. So it doesn't matter what topic you pick, there's going to be some deconstruction of that topic for you to start thinking about. So if you're doing, let's see, let's pick one out that I just read. In 505, you're going to have to do this. So the one I just wrote, oh, well, Dylan's, he is doing a knee thing, okay? He's figuring out something about the knee. I can't think of what it is at the moment. Do you remember what it is?
He's looking at stability in the knee. There's a particular jump, a tuck jump test that looks at the amount of movement within the knee, which indicates risk for anterior cruciate and ligament, ACL and MCL injury with a particular training regime.
So in that, he is now starting to write chapter 2. So since we're looking at injuries of MCL and ACL of the knee, what kinds of different topics do you think he has to put into his chapter 2? Any ideas?
Well, you have to put like something maybe
Go ahead.
the structure of the, like
Yeah,
how the knee works.
exactly. Very good. So you got to know how the knee works in order to see if it's working right or not, right? So he has to put something about that. What else?
Didn't Dr. Wall say something about a certain routine?
Yeah.
What that routine is?
Right, so he's got to look back and see what they've already done in terms of training regimes to see what has already worked and if the one that he wants to do has already been investigated or not. So a lot of chapter 2, what we want you to find out is how much has already been found out about your topic. Who has done research on your topic already? And those pieces, just like the knee structure, that's pretty basic, but at the same time, there's a lot of research out there about the knee. So is it better to do, the muscles, the ligaments, the hamstring, the thigh? Some people say the hamstring needs to be stronger, some say the thigh needs to be stronger to make the knee stable. Now, which one do you go with? Who do you believe? So that's why you do all of this. Okay, that's in both, quantitative and qualitative. Doesn't matter which one you're doing on that. The literature review is pretty much a basic on both. Pretty sure, right? I just involved it, so I gotta make sure I'm doing that right. But for the literature, you just want to deconstruct your topic and see how many different pieces fit in, and you look at all of them to see what's been found out about it. Okay, and that's where we go from there. So it's basically a critical examination of that topic. You just want to find out about all of it. And when you come to the end of 502, she's going to have you do the annotated bibliography, which is going to give you an idea of all this different summary of things that is out there already about your topic. So you'll be able to know a little bit more about that. All right, so next, then we go to planning the study. And in planning the study, this is different from a quantitative because, remember, we want to find out open-ended questions. Why, what, how. We want the process. We don't necessarily want the end result. And that's not what we're really worried about. So in your planning, you want to know the background, which is what you do first, always find out the background. And then you find out the values and the choice of method, okay? Prior interpretation. Yeah, so your background and who else has done something on that topic that you can kind of look at to see, you know, get ideas from other people and see where you want to go. In order to really establish your research question, which you'll have at the bottom, you got to find out what the problem is. Okay, is there a problem? What are you trying to figure out? Okay.
So this is for, excuse me, interrupting, but I'm just trying to make a link for them.
Okay.
So when we talked earlier in the semester about the purpose statement and trying to find a hole in the literature, what's the thing that's missing in the literature when you look at the literature? All right. So you're trying to work out what's the problem with the current picture of what we have, right? Is there a hole?
Then, once you found that hole, that's your problem, okay? That's your problem. And then you start forming your question about that problem.
So, Dr. Ray, you're saying the problem in the research we've done, or the problem in our purpose statement?
The problem in the topic that you picked.
So, in the literature that you're looking at, where's the gap?
Okay.
What's the problem we don't know?
Yeah, and that's where you want to find out. So really at this point, it's still very similar. You're still planning out your study. It's in the early stages. You look at, you do, in qualitative specifically, what we need to look at here is a little bit of your values and your personal beliefs. Because if you go with qualitative, you have to express that beforehand. You have to say what you're biased on. Okay, so I coach volleyball. I'm biased on knowing that there are some knees that are going to give out regardless of what training method I use, because I've seen it. Okay, so I have to report that ahead of time. Because in qualitative, if I don't report that ahead of time, and then I say it later, that biases my whole research, because then it says that you only looked at certain things because you were already looking for that, okay? When you're looking for candy, all you're going to see is candy. If you're not looking for vegetables, then all you're going to see is candy, okay? But maybe if you open up, you'll see the vegetables and the candy. So you need to report where you're biased. If you have a sugar fix, all you're going to look at is candy.
And that's specific to qualitative.
Yes.
You don't do that in quantitative because your bias, if you design the study properly, your bias is irrelevant.
It's already out.
Right?
You don't have because the study method helps you to keep the bias out. Whereas in qualitative, we're going to talk about it. In talking about it, what do you talk about? You talk about the stuff you already know about, right? So you're already biased. So that's where you have to really look at your values and stuff in the problem and report how you're biased. Okay, so next, then your choice. So lots of different choices in qualitative, believe it or not. There's lots of different ways that you can figure out stuff. Case studies. Case studies is a choice that's pretty simple, okay? It's not super difficult. You're going to pick either one person, one group, one entity of people, okay? Maybe you're going to pick everybody that is 34 that has a child that's 4 years old, okay? That could be your case. Or you're going to pick one person. That's your case. So case studies can be set up pretty much at random in terms of that, but you have to make it very specific what you're looking for in your case study, okay? You're investigating a certain focus or inquiry. So you're only looking at that person because of something that happened to them or because of who they are, okay? You may look at every Native American who lives in Portales, okay? That's 30 to 40 years old. Probably make that more specific. You want to make it pretty specific in a case study. So then you have ethnography and participant observation. Ethnography is more about me going to watch something. So in an ethnography, what I would do is I would go over to the Child Development Center and I would just sit in the corner and watch the kids. Because I'm looking for something. But I'm not going to say what I'm looking for because I just want to see what happens. One of the best known ones is a lady that did this with preschool kids. She was looking to see how much racial disparity there is in 3 and 4-year-olds. And she actually found quite a bit. And it was just, she just sat there, and you have to do it a long time because, especially when you're talking about kids, they have to get used to you. They have to get used to you sitting there and not saying anything because they're used to having adults interact with them at a preschool. So she had to be there like for 4 weeks before she even started doing anything. Just sitting there watching.
So would it be valid in a qualitative study for her to be behind a one-way
as long as it's a natural
window,
setting.
or so like at the CDC they have a observation room with a one-way glass
You can.
in it. Is that
She
still
needed-
valid for a
Yeah.
qualitative, or do they actually have to be in the room?
No, they can watch from outside. But you have to actually hear them too. And that would be hard to hear them unless they had speakers
Okay.
or something. Because you want to know everything.
Everything that's going on.
You can't just know the observation. You have to be able to hear. You have to be able to write down what they do.
Okay,
See every
gotcha.
little thing. So unless that is a wide
So you're not
open-
just looking, you're not looking to code a behavior, you're looking for the entire
the
picture.
entire picture.
Gotcha.
So you want the whole picture. So you could go sit at a practice, okay? On the side of a practice field, if you want to see how a volleyball team reacts to having a, coach that's authoritative compared to a coach that's, I don't know, what other one? A different type, okay? If they're democrative, okay, a democratic coach, or they have an authoritative coach. And you have 2 teams that are pretty similar. Obviously, they're not going to be identical, but they're pretty similar. So I would pick, say, a Division II school like NMU, and another Division II school, Upper Canyon. And I could pick those volleyball teams and say, that coach is democratic, this coach is authoritative. I'm going to watch those 2 teams whenever they practice and see how the people react. Okay? Not really looking for a win-loss thing. What I'm looking for is how the group of individuals, the team, reacts to those types of authoritative figures, okay, and how they get there. Now, as a result, you may find out that more of them win because of this or that. That's fine, but that's not what we're looking for. So you don't really want to predict. You want to try to keep it as factual as possible. Okay, phenomenology, nice big word, you can say it, kudos. It took me like a year to learn how to say it. Phenomenology is about, usually about one group. One of my friends, she did her dissertation on looking at female football referees, okay, at the high school level. She was going to look at all female football referees, but that became too big. Not too many, just too big. So she looked at just high school referees in football, female high school referees. So she's looking at that. All she's looking at is finding out how they feel, what kinds of things they run into, why did they get into it, okay? All of these questions. She interviewed them basically, and then watched them talk to their friends. That's what phenomenology is about. You're finding out everything about that culture, okay, of that group of individuals. Grounded theory is a way to do, grounded theory is very difficult. You really just kind of let it come to you in terms of the topic. And so you're basically making up your own theory as you're watching whatever subject you're watching. And so it's a really complex type thing, so if you want to get into something like that, we'll have to go over that a little bit more in depth later, because it's really not, it's something that some qualitative people really enjoy and they like doing, but it takes a long time and is just kind of difficult, okay? Visual methods, those are just the ways that you observe, okay? Lots of different ways. You can videotape, that's fine. You can videotape from qualitative and then you look at it later, then you code things later. It's best if you do both. You observe and you videotape and then you go back and watch it again. So qualitative takes time to do, okay? But you can find out lots of cool stuff. That's why I like it. Okay, so you have lots of different choices in that. And then you want to select your components. So after you choose a method, then you're going to see how you want to set it up. Okay? How am I going to do what I want to find out? How am I going to figure out what questions I want to answer and what the process is going through? Purposive sampling is the one that you select it by characteristic. And that's what you use almost all the time in qualitative. When I did mine, I purposefully sampled beginning tennis players who had never had a lesson. Okay. Now, in order to do that, I had to have them come and take a tennis test. I used a USTA rating system because that's already been established. Yay! When you find a rating system that's already been established, try to use it. Because if you have to make one, it takes forever. So try to use anything that you can that's already been validated. Okay? If you're going to use a survey, find one that's already been used and validated and all that good stuff. But you can make your own too. That's okay. It just takes a little bit of time. So purpose sampling is what you generally use in qualitative because you want to pick those people that are similar. You have to have a group that's similar. Okay? You have to have access to the setting. So where are you going to do this? Okay? I had to do mine on a tennis court. I had access to tennis courts and tennis balls and machines and yay, that was nice. So I had access to the setting, which was very nice. Collecting the data then, how was I going to do it? Are you going to interview? Are you going to have focus groups? Are you going to have them all together and talk? Or are you just going to interview single people separately? Are you going to have them write down what they feel like? Do you have questions for them? You're gonna have them answer those questions? Are you just gonna observe and write everything down? So those are different collecting methods. There are more than that, but those are just some of them that you could use. Then how are you gonna manage all this stuff? Are you gonna do audio tape, videotape? You're gonna transcribe everything and then read it again, go through it, highlight. There are computer programs now that do this stuff for you. You know, you can talk and type. There's a talk and type, just like talk and text, okay? That's really nice when you have that, if you have a qualitative, because you only have to talk it in, you don't have to type it in. And so lots of different ways. Those are just things that you have to select in order to figure out how you're going to do all of this. Interviews, focus groups, observation, all of those different ways, journal writing, okay? Those are different ways that we try to collect the information, and then you combine it to see how it comes out. And we'll go into that next. So selecting, and then you capture the data. Usually the primary researcher is going to be your primary instrument. That person is the observation person. They're going to look at everything. So even if I have somebody else videotape, I'm going to have to go back and watch the videotape again because it's my research. You can have more than one person looking at it because you want to have different people's opinions on it. However, the primary researcher is the one that has to look at everything. So if I interview and I videotape and I have them write down journals, I may have Dr. Wall do the interviews. I may have Jasmine do the videotape, and I may have Victoria collect the journals, okay? But I'm going to have to look at all of those eventually. They can interpret for me if I train them, but I'm going to have to do the majority of the capturing so that I know that all of these things put together combined, and I have one set of data, okay, from all of that. So the field notes, the interviews, and everything. So that's why you want to try to have, and we call it triangulation, because you have to have 3 different places that information is coming in to see if it's going to work together or not.
So you would have to have the interview transcript, your field notes from interviewing. So when you've finished interviewing someone, you write notes to yourself. And then
the memos, the audit trail goes, all of this stuff goes into the audit trail,
okay,
basically. So any interviews, field notes, analysis, we go into this. And that's where I have everything collected. So my interview, my field notes, my journal entries, okay, the analysis of memos, all that goes into one piece. So that I can look at everybody's together. And I'll show you how it you can put it together into one piece of information easily, that I found anyway, was easier for me. So this is a little transcription of a video. I videotaped all of my participants, and once I videotaped them, I had somebody transcribe all of them. They said it exactly as we said it on the video. So I wanted all the words because, remember I said at the beginning, qualitative is about words. So we want all the words, okay? We don't care how many times you talked, how many times you hit the ball across the net in tennis. I want to know what you said about how you hit the ball across the net, okay? So follow through this way, yes. On your forehand, there it is, in the squares. Those are the words that I want, okay? Do those make sense to you? No, probably not, and that's okay. Because once I looked through everything, and I had my notes from every session that I had, I would write something that said the same thing as what these said. It happened almost every time.
Whoa.
So that's just an example of how transcription can come out. But as you, let's see, I mean, this is not even 30 seconds. We had an hour session every time, so I had loads of words, okay, that you go through. And the find on a computer is great because you can find one word a million times. And that's what you want to look for. If I found a word that came out all the time, okay? So those kinds of things are what you're looking for. Usually you look, Yes,
you
ma'am.
look for, you literally look for one word, or you look for
Yeah.
a sentence, or like
a theme is what you're
a
looking for.
theme.
So you're not really looking for one word most of the time. Though sometimes there would be a word
That would define that theme.
yes, and
Okay.
then I would look for that word. Most of the time you're looking for a theme. So in this one, what I'm looking for here, you are getting there nice. If you are not ready for the next one, what happens to your swing? I want to know if he knows what happens to his swing already. He knows that he's not going to be ready. Well, I said he wasn't going to be ready, and now he knows he's not going to be ready. Said that twice. Okay, so that's a theme. He understands what's going to happen because of what I asked him, or what happened before. So now I've got a theme. Now I can go and look through and see if he says that anymore. Okay, those kinds of things. So you're looking for a theme about the information that comes in. Okay, then you have the field notes. So I described, and this is a different, I should have put the same one in from this tin too, I should have put that one in. But I'm describing what happened throughout our session. This is the researcher field notes, and you describe exactly what happened. It's very descriptive, it's very specific, exactly what we did, when we did it, so that I can, when I look at this, go back and look at what they said, and see if they match up to what I said here. That way I know that I'm not putting my own interpretation into what they said, because I have two different ways to look at it. Yeah,
So are you doing your field notes during the session, like?
after.
After?
Immediately following, because during the session, I'm talking to them and giving them.
So do you use the audio to help you sometimes with the field notes?
No.
Or no, it's just whatever you remembered right after?
Exactly.
Okay.
And so most of the time they don't want the researcher to do all of the training because they can't write it down as they're training. Because I had to remember what I did. Now I only had an hour training, so I pretty much remembered what happened in that hour. But I probably missed a few things, you know. So if you can have somebody else training and videotaping and you're writing down exactly what happens, that's even better. Okay, because then you can really have an objective view. You're not the one telling them what to do. But I didn't have anybody else that knew how to do the feedback that I was giving them, so I had to do it myself. So, but that's a good point. You do sometimes, but you have to do it as quickly as you can after you're done. So immediately when we finished, I would sit down and write down exactly what I remembered. So, yeah. Okay. So, analyzing and interpreting then. Okay, now we got all this information. We have tons of information now. Pages and pages and pages. Now what do we do with all of it? That's when it comes down to looking at key phrases and then categories, okay? Seeing if they're talking about the same thing that you wanted to find. Okay, so you're looking at those, you put memos, and then you get the themes out. So what were the themes? The themes that I found in mine, self-confidence was building. They were thinking about what was happening and their skill, okay? Because I was developing the skill, so I wanted to see if they knew how to produce the skill. Were they saying the words that I wanted? Those were the key phrases that I was looking for and the categories. So you go through and you can highlight, you can write on a sheet. What I did is I used an Excel sheet and and I put down everything that they had, and then I cross-referenced it with my notes, and used it that way. There's different ways to do it, everybody does it different. Some people put them on index cards, and they put them all out on a floor, and then look through.
That's what Dr. Drabs did, I think, because she didn't have
At that time,
computers.
yeah.
So she literally had paper spread out all over the floor, and if she had two pieces of paper that suggested the same idea, she put them together. Right?
And a lot of people use highlighters, different color highlighters. You highlight the theme. Oh, this says the same thing. Now I put those, but then this has a green. Now I've got to put it with this green. So now I got to make another card because I need two of them. So there's lots of different ways to do it. This is the most time-intensive process here. Even though it takes a while to do the actual collecting, because I did it in 8 weeks, okay, 8 weeks of collecting, but at the end of the 8 weeks, I had over 500 pages of information. So now I got to go through those 500 pages and figure out what I need to find out. Okay, if I found out what I wanted or not. So interpreting and analyzing data is very time intensive for qualitative. They do have programs now that do it. I've not heard that anybody really liked the program. I've had a couple of my friends that do qualitative and they used that and they said, well, it was okay. But they had to go back and read it anyway because you have to know the information in order to interpret it. So there's no shortcut really. It'll help you pull out the phrases and stuff, but you still have to go through and read it. So, I don't know. This is, the next slide I'll show you has a little bit of how I decided to organize mine. I like Excel because I can put, so this was journal entry, this was week 1. I had questions. I had question 1, 2, and 3. This is just for one person, one of my participants. Question 1, this was their answer, this is their answer. Question 2, week 1. Question 3 in week 1. So then one person answered this, the next person answered this, the next person answered the next line. So then I could look down and see how all of them answered this question. To me, that was organized. Everybody does it different. So to me, it helped me to see that this person only answered this person had a whole lot of stuff to say about that. Okay? Same question, but one person had a lot, the other person didn't. But did they have the same type of answers? That's what I'm really looking about. I don't care how much they answered, as long as they had what I wanted in there. Okay. So that's how I organized mine, themes and categories. And I ended up having 3 different themes from all of them, which worked out okay. So.
Can you just, what were your themes?
My themes were critical thinking, self-confidence, okay, and ability to correct. Their ability to correct. They didn't think at the beginning that they could correct themselves if they did something wrong. By the end, they could do it and they didn't have to tell them anything. So those were the ones that I found for this type of feedback. So, and here's the other thing about qualitative. You don't compare it with anything else. So it doesn't matter if somebody else did a qualitative feedback and they got different themes. So what? I got these. These are good. Okay, that's what I wanted to find out.
And that triangulation idea, having all those various forms of information on that data gives her perspective validity, right? So without the triangulation, she can't say, I found these things, like, because her opinion on what she found doesn't count without all that support and all that information. So you have to go through that process.
So I had to find the same themes in their journal entries, in their interviews, and I also did in the videotape, okay? What they said during the practice time, what they said after practice when they were answering journal entries, and what they said when I interviewed them. Those 3 things had to be the same in order for me to come out with anything. Okay? I luckily got 3. Some people get 1 thing out of all that. Some people get 10. Okay, that's a lot. But you could get quite a few. Okay? But you have to have different ways of connecting so that you do have validity. Otherwise, you're not gonna. You can't just say out of one interview, oh well, they think this. Well, you can't say that because you didn't do 3 different ways of doing it. Okay, that's what gives it credibility, transferability, and dependability and confirmability. Confirmability. It's a weird word, but it's the trustworthiness of the qualitative. That's why we know it's okay. And that's why it's become a little more respectable to do qualitative than it used to be. Because
Don't look at me.
I know you were one of them that probably didn't like qualitative.
It's true.
Yes.
I don't know, it might be crazy, but okay,
No,
so you
it's
came
okay.
up with those things.
Right.
When you, going back to the introduction, do you have to specify, no?
No.
Okay.
In fact, you don't want to specify what theme you're looking for.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Because if you specify, then you're going to be looking for that.
That's more.
Yes.
Okay. See, I'm talking something like
Yeah.
So in your introduction, you would just talk about.
You would talk about stuff, in terms of feedback, what I want to see is for them to be able to feel more confident.
So you would talk about stuff you want to see, stuff
Yes.
you want to find, not stuff that's already out there.
And stuff that's already there.
Oh, okay.
You can talk about stuff that's already been brought up in the background.
Okay.
So because of feedback, we know that students feel better about learning if they get feedback from their teacher. But we don't know if they are more confident in performing that skill.
Okay.
And that's what I was looking for.
So in a quantitative, the background would be more just what's kind of already out there, like in your case, home feedback.
Right.
And then your introduction is basically what you want to find.
Well, you don't really want to mention what you want to find, but you can say what you think you will find.
Okay.
You can say that.
Okay.
You believe that this may come out because of what's already been done.
Okay.
And it can change tack
Yeah,
in a qualitative, right?
yeah.
Is that the right way of putting that?
Mhm.
So you can go in saying, well, I don't know if I'm going to look at 2 people, 3 people, 4 people, 5 people. I don't know if I'm interested in this kind of idea, but as I'm doing the study, something else comes, another theme starts to emerge, right? That I had no idea I was going to find going into it. It's not part of the original research question, because that question can change depending upon what these people say to you. Am I explaining that properly?
No, that's right.
I'm
Because
getting there.
you
It's only
can-
taken me 5
Yeah.
years of listening to this lecture.
So you can adjust your research statement or your question or your problem depending on what comes out. What may have come out when I started teaching them was that they were good at doing it. I was doing adults, so they could correct themselves already. I wouldn't have had to give them any feedback. Well, that may have come out. Well, then I would have had to change my whole idea and say, well, counterfactual feedback doesn't help adults. You can qualify it to the people that you have, say, but I do still believe that it will help people under 16 or 11-year-olds or something like that, okay? So even though the whole thing turns out that you didn't find what you wanted, you still found something. You know? So you're never really at a loss with qualitative because even though it didn't come out like you thought it would, which hopefully you don't have too much bias on it, it still showed you something because you're looking at the process, and in the process something's going to come up. Whereas in quantitative, if you don't find what your hypothesis said, you're pretty much up a creek.
Gotta go back to the
You
drawing.
can say that it didn't come out like you wanted, but then why did you do it? That's what they're going to say.
No, no, no. Next week we'll discuss this.
Okay. But it is more valuable in quantitative if it comes out like you want. Okay. Granted, you can still say that it didn't come out like you want, but you know this is why. So you don't lose everything on either way. You don't lose everything. So research is good either way, but it's much more valuable in quantitative if it came out like you asked it to come out. It did otherwise. Okay. All right. So those are the main things you can do. Oh, the one thing, we talked about triangulation. A couple other things that help it be trustworthy are things called member checking. What member checking is about is once I did an interview and I had that typed up, I showed it to the participant and I said, could you look this over and make sure I wrote it down the way you said? You ask them again if that's what their meaning of what they answered was, okay? So after I interviewed, I was typing up what they said. I let them look at it and say, is this really what you meant? That's called member checking. That makes sure that what they told you is actually what they wanted to tell you, or if it's something different. So that's another part of being trustworthy is the member checking. Also, you can look at peer debriefing, which is somebody else that has similar background from you. So I would have another teacher look at how I gave the feedback by either watching the video or looking at the transcripts and said, do you think I did this correctly? You let somebody else interpret what you did to make sure that you did it right. Okay, so that's a peer debriefing. You want them to give you an okay on how you performed the interview or the skill development or whatever it is you're doing. You want somebody else to look in and make sure that's possible. And then the other one is, they call it a rich, thick description. And that was like I had on my field notes. Really a lot of description. Exactly what they felt, what the sun was like, what the wind was like, what birds were out, not what birds were out, but what birds were chirping, you know, there was a cardinal, there was whatever, you know, those kinds of things. You want lots of description in it. So that's rich, thick description helps you. And then you want an audit trail. An audit trail is similar to that little thing I had. You're going to say interviews, journal entries, video transcripts, all of those go into your audit trail. What happened? Which one did you do first, second, and third? I looked at this first, and I looked at this, and I looked at this. That's how your audit trail came. Okay? So those are the different ways that you can keep, you have evidence that your research is trustworthy for those people that are skeptical about qualitative. Not Dr. Wall.
Not much.
Not much.
Not much.
All right.
Just a little bit.
So in qualitative and this type of, it doesn't really matter like the time you do it and like just make sure it's in a natural setting or whatever.
Natural setting, time kind of depends on what it is you're finding out. And it's really dependent on you and how much you can do and the setting, and yeah, it really varied.
And so here's, don't start sitting there thinking, oh, I want to do a qualitative study, or oh no, I definitely want to do a quantitative study,
Yeah.
right? The goal right now is to find the question that you're interested in. And when you give us that question, we will be able to help you decide whether the best way to answer the question is to do something that is quantitative or something that is qualitative, right? You can't pick your question based on wanting to do one or the other. So the lecture this week and my lecture next week should not be influencing what you are looking for as your question, right? Because the question is the pinnacle. And then we decide, based on that question, is the best way to find out your answer to go qualitative or quantitative, right? So try really hard. It's difficult at this point because Dr. Berkey is much better at being even-minded than I am. I'm severely biased to quantitative study, and I will put my hand up. I am. My faculty were in my graduate program, and I had no qualitative background at all. So I really do struggle with this concept, which is why it's very nice to have someone else on the faculty to help you guys if I'm not sure what your study should be.
We've also had some that started quantitative and went to qualitative because they realized that's not what I want to know.
Yeah.
What I want to know is this. Oh, well, then we need to.
As you start planning it in 505 and you start setting out the methodology, then you suddenly realize that actually you can't answer the question by doing it as a quantitative study because your ideas about the question change the more you read and as the study progresses and evolves. All right? Remember back at the beginning of the semester I said it's a really flexible process. The great thing about research is it changes all the time. Right? You don't fix something and like what you do right now this week is not where you will end up in 2 months, 3 months time. It just isn't, because the more you read, the more you think about it, the more you experience the ideas of what is important to you, your purpose, your problem, your question will change. It might only tweak ever so slightly. It might become more specific. It might become a little broader. You might change it altogether, right? So right now, focus on what is important to me. What is the question that I'm asking? And then I've asked you to phrase it as a purpose statement just because that's where I'm more comfortable. But your purpose statement may say to me, this isn't a purpose statement. Like, this is clearly going to be a qualitative study, and I'm bottlenecking you into wording it in a certain way that I shouldn't do, and I will have to back off a little bit, right? But that's my job to do. Your job right now is just to find the question, right? What's the gap? What's the problem in the literature? What don't we know? What are you interested in asking?
And sometimes you don't know, which I'm sure she's told you, you don't know until you start looking.
No.
You don't know what the gap is until you find out what everybody else has already done about the topic, and then you find out, well, they didn't ask this, why don't I ask this? And then you can start looking for that and see if anybody else has done that. And sometimes they have, but they haven't done it the way you want. So then you can go that way too. So, yep.
Tori and Melissa, do you have any questions?
No, I'm good.
That's Melissa.
Oh, hi, Melissa.
Tori? Oh, Tori's typing. No, she doesn't have any questions. I think Tori hasn't got her microphone worked out yet.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions from in the classroom? All right, it's very different. Next week we'll talk about quantitative. I will try to highlight some differences again. They are different. Doesn't make one of them right and one of them wrong, even though I may sometimes sound like that, all right? As I said, that's just training and history, and I'm a tourist, so being flexible is a little bit of a struggle for me. But I am trying. I'm getting better, aren't I? I almost understand some of it. So, all right. So, make sure if you have any questions on article for this week, check in with me. If you need extensions, remember I need that request tomorrow, not Thursday morning, otherwise the answer has to be no. I think that's it. If I remember anything else, I will email you. Colton, feel better soon, my friend.
Thank you.